everyone. We are here live with the webinar number 3 on the webinar series July 2023, Regreening the Planet. Today, we're going to talk about strategies for soil and land regeneration. And as always, we have amazing panelist panel with us today. So let's jump and start the work. Okay, so this Regreening Planet webinar series, we already had 2 rounds, which you can access in our YouTube channel. Webinar 1, we talked about restoring our relationships with soil biology and ecosystems. Webinar 2, we had great examples of what does ecosystem restoration look like. And today, we're going to talk about strategies for soil and land regeneration. We have Dr. Adam Cobb join with Paul Morris to share some tips, examples, and what we can do to fix a broken soil food web and restore ecosystem health and stability. Next week, we're going to have the last round for this month. It's webinar 4, Your Future in Soil Regeneration and Ecological Restoration. So if you still don't have register that in your calendar for next week. Just pay attention that next week we will be together on Monday and not Wednesday like this week. Okay, just to make sure that the instructions are clear for everyone, especially for those that are joining us for the first time, you will be muted for the duration of the webinar to ensure that all of us have the best audio quality and we can absorb more information as we can. Enter your questions for the panelists in the Zoom Q&A session. It should pop up on the Zoom board in your computer. And if you have any question, need any support, our amazing staff is also there to help you. Also, don't forget to have fun. Talk and interact with other attendees in the chat. Enjoy this amazing webinar. So today's topic is about, like I said, strategies for soil and land regeneration. We are walking through the introductions now, and we will start with Restoration Continuum with Paul Morris, where he's going to bring a lot of amazing examples for us. And we'll follow by Dr. Adam's presentation on effective regeneration of soil and land. After that, we're going to have a quick video about our July offer, followed by Q&A session. The expected time range for today is 2 hours. Okay, so let's introduce our panelists for the day. First, we have the incredible John DeLiu. John.
Oh my. Hello, everyone. That's so big to say incredible, but here I am. And I have been a journalist and an ecological researcher for a long time. I'm now older than I used to be. I'm not going to mention the number because I heard somebody say something bad about it earlier, that I wouldn't know how to use a computer. But I'm here in China. I'm the founder of the Ecosystem Restoration Camps and Communities movement. We now have camps and communities all over the world, and many more are forming. I hope you'll all join this movement because it can grow very large and it can engage everyone in restoration. Thanks for having me.
Always a pleasure, John. Now it's the also amazing Paul Morris, which I'm having the pleasure to follow his work for years as well. Paul?
Yes, I'm Paul Morris, and I'm in the Yucatan, Mexico. And we have the Ecosystem Restoration Camp called Earth Connection Center. It's a biological reserve, and we're doing tropical forest restoration here. And I won't talk too much more about that because I'll talk about that in my presentation.
Thank you, Paul. Dr. Elaine is on vacation today, so she's also having some technical difficulties to join the meeting, but she will be here in the next webinar, bringing us all her knowledge. I have the honor to work with Dr. Adam Cobb. Adam, what are we going to hear from you today?
Oh, thank you so much, Carla. And I noticed that I didn't get a superlative like Paul and John. So if I could choose one for myself, it'd be sublime, right?
Okay, sublime and incredible, Dr. Adam. Here we go.
I just had to get that in there. People in the audience who watched the Barbie movie will know what I referenced. Okay, so I'm a science communicator here at the school. I develop some content. On our educational side, I get the chance to meet and interact with people all over the world who are making it happen and hopefully provide a little insight about how the science can inform the practice of soil and land regeneration. And that's really what I hope to bring today as well, is just my love of soil as a nerd first and foremost.
Thank you, Adam. And I'm Dr. Carla Portugal, your host for today. I'm instructor and researcher at Dr. Elaine Soil Food Web School, and I also have my consultancy company called Soil Domains. I'm located in Oregon, USA, but also do some work in Brazil. I grew up in Brazil, so that's do hard going back and forth. And I did not forget, I was just tricking you guys. So we want to hear, where are you coming from? So put in the chat, type your location, and let's see, where are we coming from today? So we have folks from England, Toronto, Santa Cruz, here we go, Arizona, the Netherlands, New Jersey, Colombia, London, Colorado, New Mexico, and I cannot read anymore, Israel. Thank you for being here with us for this other round of 2 hours with a lot of information. We really hope you can have as much fun as we have prepping this event for you guys. So, oh, sorry, wrong slide. Okay. So I also want to thank you, all the staff involved from Dr. Elaine Soil Food Web School and from the ecosystem restoration communities on this amazing partnership. I'm proud to say that we are achieving amazing results, and this is just the beginning. So follow up the ecosystem restoration communities, double check the website every single day, because there is always new information coming in our direction. And we are here to work and make this planet better bit by bit every day. So thank you everyone for joining us on this crusade. Okay, so without further ado, Paul, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about the ecosystem restoration continuum. Oh, I'm going to go. Oh, there. Okay. So as I said, my name is Paul Morris, and I have what's called a certified ecological restoration practitioner designation given by the Society for Ecological Restoration. And it's an important certification because it means that I have a certain level of education, and it means that I have a certain level of experience. So that's an important certification if you're interested in doing ecosystem restoration to work towards. If you want to connect with me, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. You can look at the Earth Connection Biological Reserve website. We also have a Planet Healers YouTube channel where we're putting all sorts of information and different videos on there on different processes that we're working with. Oh, it's a little bit of a lag between the pushing the button. So from my experience, I've had a nursery in Canada. For 20 years, I had a native plant nursery. So here you can see I started out in the front with aquatic species. So all the front species here are aquatics. And then, where's that little draw thing? Over here, you can see that there's dry land species. So I kind of moved up the shoreline into these different ecosystems. And then in the back, you can see there's all sorts of trees and shrubs that I was growing. And then we've got things like deep water ponds for deeper aquatic species. I've got bare root species in the other area here. And we have also got these greenhouses. And we've also got in the back here a shade house system, a large shade house for growing species that prefer to be grown in shady conditions, so like woodland species, spring ephemerals, and different things like that. So I was growing an entire suite of species for all the ecosystems in Ontario. And one of the things that I recognized when I was doing the ecological restoration and working with these different projects is that biodiversity is so important to maintaining the health of our ecosystems, and so few projects actually put in a full complement of biodiversity. You know, they'll choose a small subset of 12 species, and that will be your restoration. Or if there's a restoration of forests, it'll be like one species. But you know, I was growing all these sort of weird little green flowered things and things that were innocuous and people just don't notice, because I believe that they're all important. They're all making a contribution to the ecosystem, and they're also making that ecosystem function in a healthy way. So just something to think about as we're moving forward. Oops, my button. And so here's that farm. And oops, I have to undo all these arrows. So I have this farm, and the nursery is this little red square up on the top. And my draw. So this little area in here was the nursery that I was showing you. And then there's huge areas that I was restoring into tall grass prairie, because we have tall grass prairie in Ontario, still remnants. These green areas are areas of forest restoration. And so I was filling in different areas of forests that have been cut and different blocks. So trying to create more integrity with the forest and more core area. The edges of the fields, I was replanting so that it has more integrity on the edge, because a lot of farmers will plow their field right up to the edge of the forest. And so it has no armoring on the edge of the forest. Also breaking up a lot of these fields into smaller fields so that they have less wind exposure and they're holding more moisture. So just different techniques. And I go into that more in the course that we're running. There we go. And so this is a project that I'm working on right now, our Connection Center, Biological Reserve, and that's in Yucatan. And so this is just the idea of what that looks like. And it's tropical dry forest, and we have a beautiful cenote, and we live here, and we have different interns. And a project that I also worked on was a large multi-million-dollar project in the city of Toronto. And this is a hydro corridor. So this is a hydro corridor going through the city of Toronto. Originally, this was all turf grass, and they mowed it probably 8 times a year. And so all the carbon emissions and everything from mowing that repeatedly again and again and again, we decreased significantly, reducing the mowing to once every 4 years. And here you can see it, it's just beautiful. You know, we restored that into a healthy habitat inside an urban area, into a very dense urban area. So just different techniques to make our urban areas more livable and better for wildlife moving through the system. So as I mentioned, the introduction of ecosystem restoration course is in collaboration with the Soil Food Lab and with the ecosystem restoration communities. And I think they'll be talking a little bit more about that a little bit later on. So it's important collaboration to get this information out there, because it is extremely important in this time. And the ecosystem restoration communities, there's over 50 communities around the world. And then this little red square is us down in the Yucatan Peninsula. And I'm a restoration ecologist. So ecological restoration is what I do. And ecological restoration is the process of assisting the recovery of an ecosystem that has been degraded, damaged, or destroyed. So when you're doing ecosystem restoration or ecological restoration, you're trying to get that ecosystem back into as healthy a state as you possibly can. And the target is the highest level of recovery attainable. And some of the things we work on is that with the Society for Ecological Restoration has a bunch of standards that are really important, and you can download those on the Society for Ecological Restoration website. And this is one of the principles that they have, is the restoration continuum. So at the beginning here, we have like urban environment. So that meadow restoration would be an example of reducing the impacts and improving the ecosystem to improve it to a much healthier state. So what can we do to bring nature back, increase the ecosystem functions within a city? And as we move along here, I'll talk a little bit about each of these different stages, but the target is always this. We want to look for fully recovered native ecosystems. So ecosystems, this is our reference ecosystem, and it's always the target that we're aiming for. How close can we get to a healthy, undisturbed habitat and return it to the most functioning state, the highest level of biodiversity, and performing all the ecosystem services in the highest quality that we can have. So reducing impacts, a lot of people are living in the city, so reducing impacts is really a major part of that. Both major impacts, like we have novel entities, and just looking at this chart, you can see this is our safe operating space for the Earth. And then all these red zones are the areas that we've overshot and we're producing too much of, and we're putting into the environment too much, and the environment just can't handle it. So major impacts are things like novel entities. These are all our chemicals that we produce, that we've created. And most of these haven't been around for very long. Most of these have come into existence right after the Second World War. And it wasn't until the 1950s that people really started using these chemicals. So when we think about these things, I like to think, my grandfathers didn't have these things. They didn't have the pesticides and the inorganic fertilizers. They farmed more naturally. And then after the 1950s, they took a lot of convincing to get people to switch over and pay for all these different chemicals when they were farming naturally before. So just thinking about that, I think is really important when we're working with these different ecosystems and agricultural areas. How do we reduce the impact back down into a safe working space for all species on this planet? And so these are the major impacts, and minor impacts are small things like birth control pills, for example. It's a dilute source, but if we don't have proper pollution controls in our wastewater treatment, then those small dispersed chemicals get out into the system, and they start changing the sex of the fish. So we have to think about the major impacts. We also have to think about the minor impacts that are happening out there. And how do we work with all these different systems? How do we bring them back in to a safe working space? We're restoring our ecosystems. I mean, we can see climate change. We're all talking about that and all feeling it right now with all the heat. But biodiversity loss is a huge area that's being impacted. And basically, we're in an extinction event right now, because of all the damage that we've done. We've changed so much land mass, we've polluted it with chemicals, but also the agricultural chemicals, phosphorus and nitrogen, and all the stuff just goes into our waterways, and fresh water is being impacted, and one of the majorly impacted. Oceans are being impacted. So, these things are having major impacts, but there are solutions with things like ecosystem restoration, ecological restoration. And so let's start talking about that more. So this is a project that I did in Toronto, again, a large project. This was an industrial site. And so they remediated the site. They took out all the toxic chemicals, and they made it into a nice community park. And I'm proud to say that I supplied all the plants for that. So there's over 100 different species in there. And when I went there just a year ago, I was looking around, this is one of my projects. And I noticed, there's like a whole handful of very rare species in there. People don't even probably know that they're in there, but I kept saying, oh, well, why don't you put a little bit of this in there and put a little bit of that in there? And so this is like a little refuge. They don't occur very much in other parts of the province, but they're found in this little refuge within the city. And so as we're moving along, we're moving from highly impacted to less impacted. And we're starting to improve our ecosystem management. We're starting to introduce some nature back into our cities and sort of reintegrating. And then, you know, my wife works with living walls and green roofs. And you think about it and it's like, well, why do we need to have concrete and asphalt for our cities? Why can't we green all the rooftops, green all the walls? And when you fly over them, it's green, and you reduce the temperature in these places. It's really just urban planning. And how you want to move forward? Do you want to live in a hothouse, or with, you know, all these things increasing the temperature in your city 5 degrees, or do you want to have green spaces? So then moving more into farmlands, you know, how do we repair the ecosystem functions in there? And Dr. Elaine talks a lot, and Adam will also be talking about restoring the soil. And then as you restore the soil, then you're working with the plants and the different organisms, and also setting aside different areas on the farm. There's so many farms that have like very poor quality areas on them. And it's like, why are you keeping those in production? A lot of times it's like, okay, the farm incentive says if I keep that in production, then I can get a lower tax rate. If you take that out of production and put it into conservation, you change the tax rate so that there's a conservation tax on that land, then people will start restoring those because they're lower productivity. So just thinking about these different things and moving things along, let's take a look. So here we are, we're a lot of people are still at this point, industrial farming. We have all their chemicals and fertilizers, large areas tilled, large equipment. And we have all the soil loss and degradation of the soils. And of course, you know, when you have no vegetation, it takes a lot of irrigation. And the genetic diversity, that's one of the major things that we're losing, is genetic diversity in our crops, introducing genetically modified organisms, European honeybees being introduced to pollinate these large areas, because we've lost a lot of our native pollinators that used to do all this for free. So moving away from that, we know that system's not working. I kind of think of this no-till farming as kind of a gateway drug. It's like when farmers start doing no-till farming, suddenly it's like, hey, maybe those eco guys are actually right, and some of these eco practices actually start to work. We start to just cutting the stubble or crimping it down. We use a no-till drill, so you can just cut through that stubble and plant your corn or your soybeans or whatever you're planting. But the soil is armored, it's protected from the sun and from the wind, and it reduces your erosion. You get better microbiome, and you have slow release of nutrients. So obviously with these different crops, they're probably still using Roundup Ready corn and soybeans, so they're still spraying it, but it's a step in the right direction. We need to get people moving in the right direction. And, you know, as you progress along, then you start looking at different things like agroforestry, permaculture, syntrophic farming, where you start integrating different crops in there. So there's not just 1,000 hectares of corn. You've got a whole mixture of different species in there. And here you can see they're doing something like alley cropping and putting one species in there, but you could also be mixing up many different species. One of the things you can do is what's called predator disruption. Instead of having all one species, you mix it up so that the predators can't just walk from leaf to leaf and contaminate your whole site. They have, they're stopped. There's a little barrier. Oh, I don't like this other species that's in here, so I'm not moving. So just thinking about these things and trying to make your agriculture closer and closer to an ecosystem. And so this is one of the things that I talk about is stratification. So you have your tall trees, maybe it's a native tree, maybe it's a cultivar, but you have tall trees, you've got your medium-sized trees, your shrubs in there. And then on your trees, you've got your vines, and then you have your herbaceous layer down the bottom. And then maybe you have a few open spots there where you can have more sun-loving species, but just integrating all that in together. And once you start getting more diversity in there, you realize that you have more productivity than you do with a single layer field. You have multiple dimensions that you're working with now. And so you have higher productivity. So diversity equals resilience. And when we're working with climate change, we need that resilience. Now, maybe one year, this tree is the tall tree is doing really well, produces a bumper crop. And then some other tree doesn't like the really dry, hot temperatures, and so it doesn't produce. So if you put all your apples in one basket in, say, corn, and you have a bad year for drought, there goes your entire crop. So you want to diversify your crops to maintain your resilience. So some of the other things that you can think about doing, on farmland, or if you're trying to do restoration in urban areas or restoration anywhere, it's just adding some different habitat structures into the areas. Just taking brush and making piles creates habitat for insects and habitat for rabbits, different things that can use those brush piles, and eventually those brush piles will degrade and it'll be your organic matter, a spot of higher organic matter. You can put things in like perch poles, just a tall pole, and things like predators like hawks and different things will use that, and they'll come and they'll perch on that pole. And then when they fly away, they're seeding, they're dropping seeds down. So you're getting a free seed source, and they're moving them in from different areas. Birdhouse is the same. They're bringing in all these nutrients from different areas, dropping it near their birdhouse, dropping seeds near their birdhouse. Snake hibernacula, just a different area, just something to maintain the biodiversity. If you don't want to have mice or different things in your crop, think about what's the predator that's going to eat it. Nest boxes, same thing as birdhouses, just different habitats for different birds. And birds are extremely important. A lot of times in monoculture forestry, you'll see this layer developing of herbaceous material underneath there that wasn't planted. Well, guess who brought all that seed in there? It's the birds, it's the mice. They're all moving those seeds around. Those didn't just magically come out of the soil. A lot of them were planted by the different organisms. So thinking about that, and how do you attract wildlife in there to help make this whole system function better? Compost piles are really great. We got snakes laying eggs within the compost pile, and you're also producing a lot of insects for the birds to eat and different organisms. Rock piles are the same. Snakes or different organisms can hide within those, use it as their home. Oh, I got that one twice. Logs, different root wads, something that over time it'll degrade and it'll produce soil, but it's also habitat for different fungus and different things like that. Dead tree cavities, we always cut down all these dead trees. A lot of times if I'm cutting a tree down, I'll leave, 6 feet, 8 feet, 2 or 3 meters of the tree, and the woodpeckers can poke holes in it and build a nest in it or find insects in it. The fungus can work with it. So, just working with these different habitats. And this is an example of a wildlife pond that we'd recently created. And you're putting in different habitat things, like we're putting in some vegetation, you're putting in rocks so that the different birds that are coming in, different mammals can go into there and they can get back out again. Because a lot of times people will build these ponds that have straight walls, and the organisms can't get back out again once they go for a drink of water. So you have to think about how you're working with these different organisms. There you go. So when you're thinking about ecosystem restoration and ecological restoration, I'm a restoration ecologist. John would consider himself probably more an ecosystem restorationist. So the main difference that I think there is this human aspect. They're both trying to restore ecosystems and functions and processes. But with ecosystem restoration, it's more human-centered. There always seems to be a human goal. We have to restore this ecosystem for a human benefit. Oh, it's restoring for carbon or different things like that. But with ecological restoration, you're always aiming for the highest level of biodiversity and ecosystem function. And so your target is mostly biodiversity as your primary target. So humans are benefited along the way by all these ecosystem services, but you're always targeting the biodiversity, which we're losing so much of. Oh, went too far. It's got a leg on that. So now we're on to initiating natural recovery. So we're starting to work more with ecosystems that we're just starting out. So you have an old field and you're starting to restore it back into health, which is probably a lot of what people are working with. So you're just starting to increase the biodiversity in that site. And so how do you do that? Yep, there we go. So if you've got a cut area or a burned area, a lot of areas have burned this year. Does it have a seed bank? What sort of seed bank? Has the seed bank been burned so hard that the seed bank can't come up and won't recover very easily? Or is it's so far from a natural seed source that you're going to have to reseed that area because there's not going to be birds or anything moving it in there. In this picture, you can see there's been a burn, and then these ferns have come back, probably from the rhizome, so they're coming back up. So you have to think about how close is the native seed source, how close is native wildlife from that site, whether you want to leave it for just natural regeneration. You also have to think about invasive species. You know, if this was some sort of an invasive species, it was just going to take over the site. You have to think about, okay, how do I manage that so that the native species can get in there, or else the invasive species will just take over and hold the site and they can't get in there. Usually with natural regeneration, it's a much slower process. And usually I want to go in there and kickstart it and get it moving in the right direction myself. There we go. So natural regeneration is more what you call rewilding. So rewilding exists on what's called a continuum of scale, connectivity, level of human influence, aims to restore ecosystem structure and functions, and working towards creating a self-sustaining, autonomous nature. And so one of the concepts that they use is core areas. So this is basically island biogeography, a system of core areas, and obviously larger core areas are going to support more species, and there are certain species that need to have core areas. A lot of the rare species need core area to survive. And then connecting these, obviously larger corridors are better than smaller corridors, and then obviously these corridors are better than having what's called stepping stones, or just little bits that the birds or whatever can hop between these different areas. So connecting all these two areas together, creating buffer zones around them is really important for creating more continuous nature so that the organisms can move around, so the genes can move around within the landscape. There we go. So active restoration is something that I do at the very start of a project. So you're planting, you're seeding, you're reintroducing all these native species back into the area, especially species that can't get there on their own. In Yucatan, we've got things that have very large seed. And so birds aren't going to carry those very far, and they're not going to be, you know, when they fall, they just drop onto the ground nearby the tree. And you may get lots by that tree, but you're not getting them out into the middle of your 20-hectare field. So they need a little bit of assistance getting them in there to kickstart the system. There we go. So a lot of you are going to be working with agricultural land, so I put this in there. So solarization is a non-chemical way of doing things. So we're just putting a black plastic or a clear plastic down, weighing it down, and then letting the sun basically fry any sort of weeds or any weed seeds that are on the top layer. and basically it kills that top layer. It doesn't go and kill all the microorganisms. They're still going to be there as spores. Fire is another method that's used by indigenous people, and many people are using this as well. Seed bank depletion. So seed bank depletion is, a lot of times we use this in agricultural areas. So it's basically you let the field green up, and then you disc or plow it down, and then you let it green up again, and then you plow it down. So what you're doing is you're allowing the seed bank to germinate and all these weed seeds, and then you're knocking it down. And so over time, you're depleting the seed bank that's there. And if it's all invasive species and non-native species, and that's fine, it's a good technique to use so that when you're planting your native species, it has an ability to compete first and take over that space. So there's the mechanical, the typical plow and disc. You can use rototilling. The traditional method, chemical, I strongly suggest not using chemical. I put here, there's a downloadable fact sheet that the Xerces Society, they're working on protecting insect biodiversity, and they've done a lot of research on organic site preparation methods, a contemplative overview. And that's a really useful resource to get you moving in that direction towards more organic techniques. There we go. So habitat modifications is another thing that we can do. So here you can see we have modified the habitat. A lot of agricultural fields, they flatten the fields, and that's usually a characteristic that you find in forests that have been turned into agriculture and then been let go. So this forest in the background, the ground is completely flat. But if you go into an old growth forest, you'll find that there, I don't know if you can see me here, you have large trees there. And then when the tree falls over, it tips up the roots and it creates a hole. And then the roots degrade and it creates a lump. And so that it creates what's called a pit and mound topography, and it's a characteristic of old growth forest. And so what you have here is we're kind of mimic it. You give a bottle of alcohol to your excavator, and you make him go random, because they're typically most of your excavators will go, oh, I'm going to go along and make it into a nice straight line, a bunch of different holes. But you have to be out there watching them. No, random. We want random holes. And so you're digging these holes down here. And some of these holes I was digging very deep because I wanted to have amphibian breeding habitat, so holding water for longer periods of time. And then in these habitats, you're creating much more diversity. Here you have one type of microhabitat. Here you've got a wet area, and so it's holding more moisture. It's infiltrating that moisture into the soil. And then on the mounds, I can plant things like oaks and hickories, dry loving species. Halfway down, we're getting into mesic soil, so we can plant mesic species. And down in the bottom of the hole, I can plant aquatic species, willows and dogwoods and things like that. So this is important habitat diversification, and you can probably double the amount of species that you can put into a hectare of land just by increasing the habitat diversity and all these different microhabitats. So another technique for your toolbox. And as mentioned, we're increasing the amount of water infiltration, but there's many other different techniques for increasing water infiltration, increasing the amount of organic matter. You can use animals. Animals are, and similar with syntropic agriculture, you're kind of increasing the productivity. Animals basically increase the productivity of the site. They're making the cycle much more rapid, increasing the nitrogen and the phosphorus cycle, so they're moving it more quickly through the system. And syntropic agriculture is doing the same thing by cutting down all the branches and dropping them down to the ground to make more productivity and make the cycle go faster. Using plants, so here you can see, your typical cover crop is one species, but more and more the farmers are beginning to understand that multi-species complexes of different organisms So you've got your clovers in here. So you have your nitrogen fixers, your grasses, they're holding the soil. The different mustards and different things like that are harvesting different nutrients from the soil. Every species is a specialist harvesting different aspects of the soil and bringing it to the surface. And then when they die back, they're releasing that into the soil. So just understanding that is an important concept as well. Working with the microbiome, and Adam's going to talk about that a little bit. Increasing the water holding capacity, slowing the water down. So all these different things that you can do. There we go. So when we came to the Yucatan, this is what I found. All of the ground vegetation was eaten up by the cows it was allowed to have cows running around, and they just ate everything. So even the small trees that were starting to grow, they would eat them all down. So there really wasn't anything there. And so you can see that the soil's turned red and it's bare. They were eating absolutely everything in the dry season. And so shifting this from a more dry land to a more forest ecosystem is really important. And we can just run the Yucatan video. And within that video, I'm going from the city, and then I'm showing you a little bit of agriculture, and then I'm showing you a couple spots in the Yucatan. So all working with the Ecosystem Restoration Continuum. So today I'm out in an urban area. So this is Merida in the Yucatan, and they started to integrate more nature into their different urban landscapes. So originally it was all concrete and asphalt, and the temperature was much more extreme. But adding trees into these different areas, adding different vegetation. In the center you can see, they just have single trees, but they're all native trees. And so they're growing up and they're providing this canopy cover, and they're cooling the ground, cooling the air. On this side, you can see it has multiple layers, different stratification. So all these different layers add to the amount of biodiversity that's going into this area. So as you into the air, so that helps evapotranspiration, is cooling the air as well. So we have about 33 degrees, and I'm going to walk across the road into an area that doesn't have trees, and we'll see how much that temperature difference is increased because of the exposure to the full sun. So I've left the thermometer for about 3 minutes out in the sun here on this pavement, and underneath the trees it was 33, the blue line, and the red line, which is where we're at now, is over 50 degrees. So it's extremely hot, just having no vegetation. So as climate change impacts us more and more, these are really important measures that we can do to cool our cities, to bring more biodiversity into our cities. So you can try this yourself, like stand in the sun for a moment and then just walk over into the shade and feel the temperature dropping, and it feels comfortable being here. I can be outside underneath these trees for a long period of time. I definitely couldn't stay out here very long without a hat and different things to cool myself down in the full sun. So behind me you can see what was Mayan milpa. So this was probably in corn, beans, and squash for 2 years. And you can see that the land is fairly degraded. In the back you can see the black stumps of the trees that were originally here. So the slash and burn agriculture, they cut down the trees, allow them to dry on the ground, and then in the dry season they burn the whole thing. So that releases the nutrients from the trees into the ground. But then there's no more nutrients coming into this area because they've cut all the trees down. typically the trees are raining down their leaves. They have a mycelial network underneath that's providing nitrogen. A lot of these trees are nitrogen fixers. So they've cut all that down. And so basically for 2 years is the only amount of time that they can grow corn, beans, and squash before the land is completely depleted. And the soil in the Yucatan is very thin. You know, maybe some places you have 10 centimeters, maybe you have 20 centimeters at most. But then in the background, you can see, you know, there's a big lump of rock. So after 2 years, they've come back in here and they've planted henequen. Henequen is one of the few things that will grow on this very depleted soil. And so you can see there's rows of henequen. So when you go to do an ecological restoration on this piece of land, it's going to be very hard to put the trees back because you have to find the pockets of soil so that you can plant your trees. And the moisture holding capability of the soil after it's been in corn, beans, and squash, and after it's been in henequen for a long period of time, is very low. The organic matter in the soil is greatly depleted. And so it becomes very difficult to restore this type of an area. So this is henequen, and it produces a really useful fiber, an organic fiber. The henequen is native to the Yucatan, so it's a species that grows fairly easily. In terms of ecological restoration, once this field is finally out of production, a lot of the tree species are here. They just need their early successional species because they've been cut back. And so if you just let them go, these would be released and you'd have a scrub forest here, but you'd be missing a lot of the different elements, the larger trees, because the larger trees have big seeds and so they can't seed in, and birds have a harder time moving them around. So you'd have to return a lot of these different species like the ceiba and the peach that have big seeds, and you'd have to plant them back into this area to kickstart the ecosystem and get it going towards a natural forest again. So it's a long process, especially since you've degraded the soil completely. And restoring it in this way, and in very dry land situations, this is actually a technique that you can use. You can't grow anything else, but you can grow henequen. And so it is starting to add more biomass into the soil. It is sequestering carbon. So in a very degraded site, henequen is actually a very useful plant. So here I am out on the property. This is the 40 hectares in the Yucatan. And you can see the site is fairly dry right now. We're in the dry season, but even this whole area here is very dry normally. And when we removed the cows, we'd put up fencing to keep the neighbors' cows out of this area. Most of the vegetation that remained has thorns. So you can see here, there's a lot of thorns on these different bushes. We even have, it's very dry, so we have things like cactus. And most of these bushes in this area of the property, this is the front half of the property, which we haven't done a lot of active restoration on. And so whatever's here is basically what's regrown. And here you can see another species. So this is an early pioneer tree that's grown up, and because the cows had wiped out most of the vegetation and only the species that are spiny, and you can still see the spines sticking out on it, this early pioneer species has grown up very rapidly, but it only lasts about 10 years, and you can see it's already starting to die back. And so a lot of this area, the primary species have died back, but there's not a second growth coming up of the later successional species. This one is also a primary colonizer. It's a nitrogen fixer, but it again has large spines. This is one of the native trees that will grow. It's a later successional species, but there's very few of these within this area that are remaining. And on the ground, you can see what happens when we release. You know, there's a lot of rocks in the soil, so it's partially recovered, but it can't really go much further because there's not the seed bank here, and the cows have wiped out all the young seedlings. So what's happening is it's all turning into grassland right now. Some of the trees are mostly shrubby trees in this area, and we're allowing the natural regeneration to occur in this area because we're focusing on the back half. But you can see most of the organic matter is on the ground is grass, and slowly that will build up over time, and we're allowing that process to happen naturally on the front of the property. And when we have more time, we'll come in here and we'll plant back in a lot of the native species, and hopefully with this organic matter starting to build up on the ground, then it'll be a richer soil by the time we come in and start planting the trees. So in the back half of our property, we're doing our biological reserve. So we've been actively restoring this area of the property, and you can see that it's much darker in this area. The trees have started to come together and grow together, and they've limited the amount of light. So you're getting a lot more moisture being held in the soil, and it has this constant rain of leaves down that is fertilizing the soil, that's covering and armoring the soil. And then once you start building up the organic matter, it starts becoming more brown, and then you get fungal associations, and you get a healthy soil microbiome. And all that organic matter, suddenly you'll start seeing little funguses, little mushrooms popping up everywhere, and then you know that you've enriched the soil, and it's giving you signs that you're making progress. So you can see now we have a good herbaceous layer, and the amount of grasses that are there is reducing, so it's more herbaceous rather than grassy species. The light has been limited. We have a good shrub layer, we have medium trees, we have mid-height in the canopy, and then we have full-size trees. Most of these trees are smaller, they're still growing, but we're getting that canopy closure, which is really important for reducing the amount of light and starting to shift the ecosystem over to health. And one of the things that I really love about doing ecological restoration is the return of the animals, the different creatures that use these healthy habitats. You take the city, the agricultural areas, and there's much lower biodiversity, and we need to figure out how do we integrate these different steps into our different ecosystems. How do we return the biodiversity back into it? We've taken so much of the land for ourselves, and in agriculture, it's like any sort of insect gets in there, we spray the heck out of it. We have to figure out how to work with nature. When we're restoring a property, the different signs that I see of a healthy ecosystem returning, the wildlife returns. One day you randomly get a new species that comes in, and it may come and then disappear, come and disappear. And then suddenly one day you notice, hey, it's staying around, and that species has got enough habitat here that it can survive. And then suddenly the next little while, you get a whole flock of them in here. So you've got a good habitat. And then at some point, we're starting to get different predators in here because we have enough food source on the ground, enough diversity of different food sources that we can have predators living here. Start moving the ecosystem in the right direction, and all the wildlife is keyed. The native species are keyed to the native wildlife, and then we quickly reestablish the whole ecosystem. So we know it works. So let's get out there and do it. I just wanted to show you, this is the Earth Connection Center that I was talking about. And the front half of the property is the area to the left. And the more biological reserve that we've been actively working on is to the right. And so working with the ecosystem restoration continuum, it's nice because it gives you a terms of reference. It's like, okay, let's find a reference ecosystem, and how much can we move this whole thing from the left to the right? Okay, we're in a city, how can we add some more nature to it? Okay, we're improving the nature, how, okay, let's work with farmland. Okay, let's move the bar along towards your reference ecosystem. How can we create the highest biodiversity, the most ecosystem functions within every aspect of our existence? Because, it's not just about us, it's about all the species of this planet and how we work and we live together and how we support each other rather than saying, I'm the only one. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Amazing, amazing presentation. I'm still mesmerized with so many diversity in the video. Thank you.
Hopefully that
Okay.
wasn't long for you.
Hopefully what? Sorry?
I said, hopefully I was within my time limit.
Oh, yes. And I mean, I was just nerding out. So for me, it's never enough. Adam, passing the word to you now.
Awesome. And I can tell why you were nerding out, Carla, because you and I have had many conversations about how passionate we are, that for both of us, restoration and ecology was kind of a gateway into the life that we live now. And for me, it was restoration ecology was the first science class I had taken in 8 years when I was 27 years old in grad school. And I was like, I want to be a scientist because of taking that class. And really, especially because that class started with the soil. And that's really the topic I want to bring in here is I love everything that you presented, Paul, about how we can involve management and other outside inputs into the system that can help drive success to getting back to something that is more representative of that reference ecosystem.
Yeah.
The essential workforce that I want to highlight is, let's see, I think I have a little bit of a lag here. Okay, is the soil microorganisms, and especially the partnership between those microorganisms and the plants. So the ones that are really good collaborators are going to drive so much, because it is really hard to restore dirt. Dead, lifeless, used to be soil, maybe hasn't had vegetation on it for a long time, is missing the microorganisms that were there, or their abundance and diversity has been depressed in that system because of the way it was managed for so long. And we have a huge problem globally with the expansion of dirt. And it's sometimes called desertification, as the spread of dry areas that are kind of not, I'm not talking about beautiful dryland ecosystems like the Sonoran deserts, but wastelands, areas that used to have something that was functioning and has fallen apart, often due in some way to human activities. And so our goal is, how can we bring back soil? The organic material is essential before you could call something soil. The aerobic organisms in particular, there's always a place in soil to talk about anaerobic and facultative organisms, but that top 10 centimeters of soil where the plant roots get their start needs to be a very oxygen rich environment, because the plants themselves, most of them, need oxygen, and most of the microorganisms that partner with them as well. So I have to start with a little gloom and doom, because globally we are going through something like another Dust Bowl, right? If you look back at pictures or hear the stories about the Dust Bowl in the US, we are facing massive loss of our global soil health, deforestation, chemical agriculture, many other landscape abuses, alterations by humans are driving this, as well as top-down drivers like climate change. This is an El Nino year, and I've heard a bunch of people say this is the hottest summer that they've ever experienced. And then the scary thing is, it might be one of the coolest summers that we all get to experience for the rest of our lives. Unless we get involved in revegetating this planet, changing the way our landscapes are managed, accumulating the carbon that we've put in the atmosphere back into the soil systems, and turning down the tap of how much carbon human society, not all humans, but a lot of us, are pumping out into that atmosphere. So we just have to face the reality. Because once we do, and once we learn to appreciate the functions that a healthy, thriving soil ecosystem delivers, the way that it supports us. And, we had an interesting conversation going on in chat about ecosystem services versus functions. And I also really like functions. And this is what the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN has focused on, because if you value something like life or tree or soil microbe, and you put a number on it and you make it into an economic entity, then it puts it in a decision-making process where you might say, well, for the sake of the profit I want to make, it's okay to degrade that thing. It's okay to chop that tree down. And in reality, we're at a point where the system has been so stressed for so long, especially since the Industrial Revolution, that it's not just the services of an entity or a type of microorganism or a tree that we need to consider, but the functioning of the entire biosphere that is being threatened. The way that, for the last 12,000 years or so of history, we've been in this beautiful Goldilocks zone, sweet spot with our climate so that our society could develop. And if we don't do the right things as humans, we have the power to take ourselves, our society, our civilization, and a lot of other life with us as we go out. And so I just want to recognize that this is the planet. If you were an alien arriving here and looking at Earth, you would probably conclude that planet belongs to the plants and the microbes. That they're by far the biggest piece of the biomass, right, of this planet. And they built the planet, the microbes and the plants together, their partnership, the facilitation that microorganisms can make through providing nutrients and stable soil structure to the plants, and the way that the plants collect sunlight and carbon dioxide and then make sugars to feed their microorganisms. It's an incredible thing. And comparatively, the animals, and that includes things like insects, right, are so small, and humans are so small in retrospect to the entire equation. But we alone have a capacity for intellect and cooperation that gives us the choice to support and facilitate the rest of life, or to exploit it to the point that it loses. It will lose. The rest of the biosphere will lose if humans don't do the right thing. So I want to keep that in mind here as we move forward. Because everything about landscape management, vegetation management, ecological restoration, all the components are like stones in this arch. And I would just come along and say, we have to remember that soil life is the keystone. If that one thing is knocked out, the whole arch will fall. It's holding it all together. And, there's been a discussion about biochar in the chat and other things. I'm open to all of that. I've done a little research with biochar. I think it's really cool because it can benefit soil life, right? It's not the thing itself. It's the way that it can be used as a tool to create a thriving, living soil ecosystem, which can lead to thriving plants that can save our landscapes. So this is a simplified version of the soil food web. I went into a little more detail in webinar 1 of this series, but I just wanted to remind you, it's this beautiful tapestry of relationships. If we put all the organisms we know about, there'd be too many connections to notice. And we know a fraction of what's there in the soils of this world, a fraction. All of human knowledge of soil and its story, maybe 5% of the total. I mean, that's what Nicole Masters says in her book. It's probably really optimistic to say we know 5%. So let's stand back and wonder at this. This is one of my favorite quotes. Nature is not more complex than we think, but more complex than we can think. Even when we come to the table and have our accumulated expertise and experience and education, we have to be humble in the face of what's been developed over millions of years of evolution. And it's their story as much as it's ours. We get to facilitate what's going on with the rest of the plants and microorganisms that we share this planet with, but we're probably not essential. This planet got along for a long time before humans came around. The fungi, the bacteria, the nematodes, the protozoa, the plants, they're essential. It's their planet. Okay. So, this, I don't want to overcomplicate anything, but I want to bring forth like a kind of a synthesis that I've come to recently. I had learned about the disease triangle in grad school that says you have to have the presence of a pathogen or something that's potentially pathogenic, as many organisms can switch. You have to have a susceptible host, like your crop, your plant has to be vulnerable in some way. And then you have to have a certain environment, an environment that's conducive to disease, maybe a very anaerobic environment that stresses the plant out. And then only at the overlap of those three things do you have disease in a crop or an animal or a human. To put a positive spin on it, this is to me what's happened is like the environment has been altered by humans. And when we talk about restoration, it's getting back to a place where there's the mutualists, especially the microorganism mutualists of plants. There's plants that are good at partnering with those local microorganism populations. And then there's an environment which we have helped bend it back to where it's favorable to symbiosis, to allowing these things to live together. And the overlap of those three things is where thriving starts to happen again, and where things can take off and recover and regenerate, and where we can get the restoration of our landscapes from. And Carla, I know that we're already into our time a little bit, but I'll try to wrap this up in about 5 minutes. So to me, the umbrella term, we've talked about restoration and syntropic farming and permaculture and all of this. And I love all this, exploring these different philosophies and approaches. I'm going to say that from my perspective, biological soil management is the umbrella term. That's what I'm talking about here today, is that in any system, in any way, we reach for the knowledge about how the biological system used to function, could function again if we designed it that way. And I love, Paul, that you brought up the tallgrass prairie, because I took this picture in a tallgrass prairie in Kansas. It's like my favorite ecosystem on Earth. And humans do so little to maintain this glorious thing. Even historically, like there was burning and some other management that native peoples did, but the grassland, the herbivores, all of it worked together. It was constructed over millions of years. That's the essential thing, is that the soil biology and the ecology of the system pushed it to stability and diversity and all of these things that we're looking for with restoration. So that's my reference a lot of times in an agricultural system is, can we make it more like a tallgrass prairie? So we talked a little bit about ecosystem succession, and I just want to mention that as above, so below. As you see different plant communities above, the soil changes. Maybe the relative biomass of fungi to bacteria change. And this shouldn't be so much of a straitjacket or a recipe for us, but it should help guide us. How do I match the thing I want to grow with the ecology of its wild relatives in the plant kingdom, with the kinds of soils they developed in? How can we match the way we're breeding crops to have some of that genetic diversity that was there in their wild populations. And so I always go back to this model, which Elaine has so eloquently articulated for like 2 decades or more. And so the regenerative solution that we really try to break down into a practical thing here is we talk about using biocomplete soil amendments, composts, plant teas, biocomplete extracts, so that we can create a source of local microorganism populations, a place that they can grow and become very, that they can thrive in, right, in the compost pile. And then we try to introduce those organisms back into our soil systems to recover from the biodiversity loss or the abundance loss. And you could call me biased here, but the fungi are a huge part of the story for me, and somebody who studied them, the way that they change soil structure, the way that they facilitate aerobic conditions, the way that they partner with not only plants, but many kinds of bacteria to get the system functioning again. So this is where we go into thermophilic composting. And I'm gathering materials to do a thermophilic pile at my house. It's surprising how much can come from my own yard and the kitchen waste that I produce here. And I'm going to go out into some more wild areas, and I can figure out which things are invasive weeds or what populations I could harvest a little from, and I'm going to bring back some of those more wild populations of organisms as well to add into my compost pile. And then we can do brewing. We can keep the teas aerobic with aeration, and it's all it's technique, right? It's getting the sweet spots of these things. And then that becomes another tool that we have to protect our plants. Just had a friend today, she brewed up a tea and had a huge aphid problem on some of her plants in her yard. And she sprayed that tea on, and the organisms that introduced through that tea to the surfaces of the plant and the way that it helped the plants regulate its immune system, those aphids pretty much disappeared within a few weeks. And I'm not going to say that will happen with every single insect or pest, but it can't hurt to reintroduce these organisms right to the surfaces that they often live on in native ecosystems. These are two of the tools that we utilize, and we have examples, especially in our foundation course, of large-scale projects that have done things like biocomplete composting. And then I don't know if you can see my my mouse cursor here, but the tailoring the compost to different fungal or bacterial ratios and doing things like growing the plants in the compost for a while to condition it for its application in the field afterwards. This is really cool stuff and very effective. You know, it's not hard to look at a hillside and say, we did something. We turned it from dirt to soil. The plants are back, right? This is the combination of efforts, the soil and the plant efforts together. So I think this is maybe my last slide. I know we're a little over, just maybe 10 minutes over into our Q&A, so we'll get to that. But I just wanted to mention there's all these benefits, whether you want to call them functions or services. Why would a person make the decision to invest their time and energy into understanding, monitoring, and learning these techniques for biological soil management? I talk to farmers now almost every week, people who are students of the school, who are like, I used to do it the chemical way, and it was horrible. And I was killing things every day. And I was spraying toxic substances all over my land. And I was degrading the natural fertility of my land with the kind of green revolution style agriculture, for lack of a better term. And then they started getting into this biological soil management pathway, and they did the work to change their mindset about how they related to their land, and they used the tools that we taught them, and they're moving towards a system that naturally suppresses diseases, retains nutrients so that they aren't leaching into rivers and streams and causing problems, has structure and stability, holds more water so that if there's a drought, the plants go deep, send their roots deeper and they find water. And if there's a flood, the water is accepted by the soil instead of becoming runoff and eroding the soil. And even, I get questions about this all the time. Our environment is so full of pollutants, and these microorganisms, especially the fungi, have a huge array of abilities to decompose toxins. Even some of these so-called forever chemicals that humans have made, in the right conditions, we can break them down. I mean, not us, the microbes and the plants and the power that they have. So that's really what I wanted to bring to the table today, was just that big picture look at the magic of soil, right? And I don't say magic in some charlatan-y way. It's science, right? It's biology, it's ecology, but it's fantastic. It feels beyond the ordinary to me as I discover what happens in a thriving soil ecosystem. And it's over to you, Carla.
Thank you, Adam, for another great presentation. And I like to say that magic is the science that we still don't know how it works. So let's continue to develop. There's so many things we can do. And now going with a bit more information about you guys, the webinar of this month, this webinar series of this month, is all about the Ecosystem Restoration Bundle. So when you buy the package, you're going to get full access to the Soil Food Foundation courses for this special price, and also get 3 amazing programs absolutely for free. So the promotion ends tomorrow. And if you have any questions, you can always reach the school for support. And it's available for this price in the final time. So I'm going to run a quick video and talk to you soon.
When we're talking about the soil, we're talking about the base of everything.
Even our health depends on the health of the soil.
All the sickness and disease leads back to where you live, how you live, and what you eat.
People don't want to use the chemicals, but they don't have any other way.
It's not a desire problem, it's a knowledge problem.
Everyone needs to have some awareness of what our Earth is experiencing right now and how we can make a big change.
I find that this information hasn't been taught to me, and I had to get off my high horse. And even though I have a PhD, I feel like I'm totally undertrained.
I feel like I'm learning more with this program than I have with in-person classes in the past.
I've taken classes on microbiology before, but this course really makes a difference in the way that a story is put together that unveils the relationships between plants and all those beneficial organisms that we just cannot see without a microscope.
If you're looking for something that does a deep dive into soil biology, this is it. It is just an incredible knowledge base and is really relevant to what's going on right now in the world.
Without it, the only way I could have gained this knowledge would have been by dropping my life and going to graduate school. And that just wasn't realistic for me. But Soil Food Web has made it possible for me to build a meaningful career in land restoration.
I was really nervous. I was going to put quite a bit of money down and not get that bang for my buck. But once I actually got into the FC courses, I was incredibly impressed with how professional they are and actually the level of education you receive. This is the career path I've been looking for in the biological community, and I was having trouble finding.
Buen dia.
Salam. Ciao.
Bula.
Wagwan.
Bonjour.
Merhaba. Gamertuba.
Barevsiz.
Kia ora.
It's absolutely amazing to me that there's people with their same approach to life wanting to do better things all over the world. What the course is doing is actually getting those people together.
We don't have enough.
In terms of the connection to the network, I have found just an environment of camaraderie and cooperation.
They want you to succeed, and they bend over backwards to give you all of the resources to have you succeed.
At the Soil Food Web School, we train farming professionals and ordinary people who are passionate about the environment. Our students are able to help make a real change to the way that food is grown in their communities and to how the earth is being treated.
If you're looking for a way to make a big positive impact on the environment, the Ecosystem Restoration Bundle could be for you. Whether you're a farmer or agricultural professional looking for a way to transition to regenerative ag without harming profits, or someone looking for an impactful new career as a soil food web consultant, lab tech, or compost producer, or if you're someone who is really passionate about ecosystem restoration, this bundle has a lot to offer you. We've put together 4 really powerful tools that will help set you up for success, enabling you to make an impact on the soils and ecosystems in your part of the world. Tool number 1, the Soil Food Web Foundation courses, where you'll learn all about how soil functions on a biological level. Tool number 2, the Introduction to Ecosystem Restoration, where you'll study ecological principles and ecosystem restoration techniques. Tool number 3, the Certified Lab Tech program, an intensive 3-month program designed to help you master Dr. Elaine's microscopy technique. Tool number 4, the Introduction to Permaculture, teaching a regenerative design approach that can be applied to water management, growing systems, dwellings, and much more. Watch the bundle overview video for a more in-depth analysis of these fantastic course offerings. This July, with the Ecosystem Restoration Bundle, you can register for the Soil Food Web Foundation courses for just $3,800, saving $1,200, and you'll get these other 3 powerful tools absolutely free, saving a total of $3,800. That's an incredible savings of 50% off the total bundle value, which is $7,600. This will be the final time that the Ecosystem Restoration Bundle is being offered at the current rate of $3,800, and this cost will be adjusted upward. Financing options are now available, so you can pay at your own pace with a firm. We're putting these 4 amazing tools together because we really want to set our students up for success. Whether you're a farmer looking to transition to regenerative ag while having a positive impact on the wider ecosystem, a budding soil food web professional, or someone who wants to dedicate themselves to the cause of ecosystem restoration, these 4 tools combined will give you a great foundation. We hope you'll come join the soil revolution today and be part of the Soilution.
Okay, so once more, if you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out to our team. You can also email us at info@soilfoodweb.com. So let's start the Q&A. We have amazing questions. Once more, thank you, everyone. You always give us the good problem of which questions you're going to tackle first. So let's start with Zara's question. What are sustainable strategies to reduce soil compaction, both?
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Paul.
Okay. So some of the sustainable strategies for reducing soil compaction would be things like adding organic matter back into the soil. If it's really compacted, if you've got, what do you call that layer? There's a compaction layer where you can't even get through the water system.
Maybe a plow pan?
Yeah, a hard pan, sorry, that's the word. It wasn't coming to me right away. If you've got a hard pan, then maybe you do need to do some sort of a mechanical scarification, taking a mechanical arm and going through that so you can break your hard pan and so the moisture can start moving. You can also add things in. Different species have aggressive root systems that can break through hard pan. So that's one of the first steps, make sure you don't have hard pan. And you can till. I mean, obviously tilling loosens the soil, but you also start losing your microorganisms. So best is to add bioactive components, compost, manure, different things like that. Some of the different soil food web mixtures, and allowing the microorganisms to start to thrive in there, and then they'll start to build that soil and build that soil humus and start to aerate your soil, decompact it again.
Yeah, I mentioned fungi, and they're, uniquely have the capacity to entangle soil particles and to create pore space for air and water to move through the soil, and by facilitating the growth of plants, the plant roots can also push through compaction layers. In some cases, I mean, you get to a certain level and the roots are really going to struggle to push through. So it all works very holistically together, and the plants and fungi have a lot to do with it, but the bacteria are there, and protozoa and the nematodes, they all have a role to play in cycling nutrients, in facilitating each other. I mean, there's just wondrous mystery out there about how all these organisms and plants signal to each other and do feedbacks on what they're encountering in the soil system. And it's like you could spend multiple lifetimes just looking at the chemical signaling of the biology in soil. So, but I just want to say, yeah, you got it for sure in there. It's the organisms that are, and organisms writ large, right? All the living things in that system that are going to work together to fix and then maintain soil structure.
John, any complementary comments? Sorry.
Well, I would just say that certainly evolutionary succession is about accumulation. There's always more biodiversity, always more biomass, and always more accumulated organic matter. And this is what we humans have done, is reverse evolutionary succession and go backwards. And when we do that, we can see the results, and we're all facing that right now. So this is the moment for us, and I think the future for people who are working in this field is going to be pretty good. I know that there's quite a lot of need, certainly. And I'd also say that one of the things that we need to realize is that the value of ecological function is much higher than people now understand. So now they think that you can buy and sell products and that's the main thing, or somehow you can, well, cheat people with betting on the difference between the cost and price of things, speculation, or interest-bearing debt. But these things are nothing. And the reality is we're depending on these functional ecosystems. So the way forward is to restore these systems. I'd also say that one of the great things for compaction is to do these action days. There's a group in LA that has the soil sponge initiative, and they just take 20 people and 2 pickup trucks filled with straw bales and manure and seeds, and they go out there with picks and shovels, and in one day they can take a place and turn it into something beautiful. It's great. So good luck to everybody there.
Yeah, and I think that's also needs to, at the same time that all this biological movement happens, we cannot forget the social pressure that we can help build up on top of it, from not just deciding the management techniques that you're going to use, but also think the equipment you're going to use, especially when you go for large scale. So think through every detail of the process to, as you go, adapt the different techniques and test which one are going to work better in your field. It's always about testing as well, right? There is no one solution fits all. Okay, so next question, beautiful comment from Jay and a question. Hi, thank you for your presentation and for all the work you do in restoration. It is very much appreciated. My question, can you talk about Soil Food Web School and the component that is restoration? I'm interested in it, though it seems the biggest component is working with farmers. I work as a natural resources professional, and I'm looking for opportunity to learn, have experience, eventually work more in restoration. I'm considering graduate school for restoration, but at this time, I'm holding off. I'm interested in the school and if and how it can work for me. Thank you for your time and your help. Who wants to tackle first?
I can take a shot at this. We were having a little discussion in chat about this too, and I just want to be clear in case I misspoke. We're not going into any ecosystem or farm where we would expect that the organisms are just gone, right? But in that top 10 centimeters, they may really be diminished in terms of the species that are there and the abundance that are there. In some cases, they've retreated from the disturbances that are happening in those upper layers of the soil, the chemical disturbances, the tillage, into lower layers, if they can do that, or they've retreated into the aggregates of soil, the crumbs, right? And it's like all of that life is like tensed to get away from the problems that are happening, especially in agricultural systems, but in clear cuts and in all these things, it's a harsh environment. So it's the reason why we go with the compost to re-inoculate that top layer is not only because we need to get the organisms deployed quickly into that top 10 centimeters, but also because if they die really rapidly, if we put them back there and they don't survive, that tells us something else has to change environmentally, right? So we might have to put in a lot of organic material because they didn't have any food to eat, or we may have to mitigate a chemical problem that's going on. Maybe there's a residue of something. And so in that way, we're focused on the composting and microscopy because it is both getting the essential workforce back into that top 10 centimeters where they can interact with plant roots and help the plant from the first time it emerges from its seeds, but also so that they can be indicators to us. Is the management right of that land? Do we have to do something? Are we doing something periodically that knocks the organisms back, right? That slaps them and makes them retreat again. And so that's really our whole strategy is like, it's often called the O horizon or the O and A horizon, the top layers of soil. In ecosystems like the tallgrass prairie I showed, it's full of life. It's thriving. Everything is so dynamic. Everything is eating everything, right? Everything is cycling nutrients. And in a lot of our agricultural systems and in a lot of the desertified or degraded landscapes that we're interested in restoring, that top 10 centimeters of soil is dirt instead of soil, right? And so we have to work on putting back the life and the food and the housing and all the things, right? And make that top layer an ecosystem again.
I might say a word to Jay. I think I guess I look at it a little bit differently because I have seen transformational change take place in vast areas. And I've seen things that were just I thought were impossible. And basically, I think everybody thought was impossible. And if you understand it, then you can do it. And right now, we're facing an existential threat from climate impacts and from biodiversity loss and toxicity and a number of other things. So essentially, if we don't understand what's happening and we just kind of think, well, we can go shopping and it'll be all right, I don't think it's going to work. So we really need everybody. And if this is what you're called to do, then give me a call and I'll talk to you about it. There's a lot to do.
Okay, sorry, go ahead, Jonathan. Go, Paul, sorry.
I think for myself that there seems to be a lack of ecological knowledge out there, and it really needs to be spread, the information. How do ecosystems work? How does the soil food web work? How does the plant communities work, and how do they work with the animals, and all these different interactions? It's and I can talk for myself about the course that I'm giving. There's 2 whole modules just on basic ecology and biology, and just getting people up to the speed before we even start talking about ecosystem restoration, because that knowledge base needs to be built up so that we understand, how do we restore those ecosystems? How do we restore the soil? How do we, return species to lands where they haven't occurred for many, many years? It's really important. I mean, we want to live, a lot of people want to be eco, but they really don't understand what eco is, and they don't understand ecology, which is the basic fundamental building blocks of living in ecological life. So I think it's really important to get that knowledge out there.
There's one more thing I might say. I've found that the biology and physics are interrelated. And it was very strange for me because I talked to physicists and they didn't seem to think that biology had anything to do with it. And then when I was out doing research, I was like, wait a minute, it's everything to do with it. This is determining the surface temperatures, the available moisture, everything has to do with the biology. So, and it's breathing, and it's symbiosis, and we're part of this symbiotic system. And we've been, I don't know how we got to the point where we started calling ourselves Homo sapien, because there's kind of evidence that mushrooms are smarter than we are. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure. At least they're not doing as much damage. And so I think we need to really have a collaborative inquiry for collective intelligence. That's what I would recommend. I haven't seen in graduate school that it goes at the speed. I think we need to, like, when Adam said, you've got the con, I think we'd better go at warp speed if we want to have a real success. Anyway.
Yeah, I think that the 3 of you summarized perfectly what I think is about the same way that we are looking for diversity in biology, in our work in the soil and everything. We need to have this diversity in the team that we work as well, because different mindsets, different perspectives, we're only going to bring better ideas and enhance the techniques you are using. So interdisciplinarity for me is also very important. And connecting to that, I will bring the next question with, I think that Paul has a lot to say. What are some channels other than the Soil Food Web School for parks, urban planners to formalize their knowledge of ecological regeneration, ideally including some form of certification if you don't have an academic background in biology? Thank you, Kyle.
For myself, I'd say working with the ecosystem restoration camps is really important, getting some hands-on knowledge of the different skills for restoring ecosystems, working with the Society for Ecological Restoration. They also have different webinars as well. The Soil Food Web, of course. ecosystem restoration communities, all these different things have different components. Even the UN decade on ecosystem restoration, they've got all these different connections that you can connect to. And, even things like LinkedIn, I'm on LinkedIn, and it's more of a professional discussion on there. And so you're always picking up different things. Oh, I'm doing this technique for mangrove restoration. Oh, I'm doing this soil restoration technique. People are constantly posting things on there. So it's a useful thing to be connected to. So, and just working with different people in communities. If there's a project going on, stick your hands in the dirt, get out there. That's really how you're going to learn. You walk around in nature and see how nature functions. You won't find it in your computer screen as easily. It's about getting out there.
Yeah, and I think that's also part of what's your goal in life. Why do you need this certification or this academic background? Because it's not just biology. The beauty of restoration initiatives is that it's interdisciplinary. So there's always space and there's always need for diverse backgrounds. So don't stick to just like, oh, I don't know anything about biology, I cannot work on this project. I know for sure that you're always going to be welcome if you have the willingness to learn and to be there hands-on.
For restoration projects, we need a lot of the different groups need different aspects. Like we need community outreach, we need fundraisers, we need, all these different aspects of education. I might have a whole bunch of knowledge and I'm trying to get it out there, but, I'm a scientist, I'm not that great at it. I need other people that have these different strengths. You can contribute to ecosystem restoration, not just by planting the tree in the ground. That's the fun part, of course, but then there's also the maintenance of it and the long-term monitoring and all this type of stuff. Find your strength in doing ecosystem restoration. There's many avenues that you can support doing the work.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I'm gonna have to send some kind of a bill to Nicole Masters because I have talked about this book so many times and I'm reading it right now. It's very influential on the way that I'm learning again many of these aspects and how to put this story together, right? For the love of soil. Highly recommend it to everybody because she doesn't talk like an academic, right? She talks in the themes and the worship of the natural world and of these soil systems. And it's so refreshing the way that it's all put together. And so I think you said in the chat to clarify the person who asked this question that it's just that they don't want to go back to grad school. You don't have to. We live in an information age. There's books out there, YouTube videos. You can pick up the basics of some ecology and whatnot. You have to keep reaching, right? It takes radical self-responsibility, which is something I quickly learned in grad school too. I thought I would go there and it'd be like undergrad, and I'd just be like, give me the knowledge. It doesn't work like that. You have to reach for the knowledge. You have to push yourself, and so yeah. But be part of this community too. This is what we're trying to facilitate, that people would access good knowledge, that they cut through the inaccuracies that are out there in the world, and that they would get a framework for how to have soil vision, right? An ecosystem and an ecological vision, and all of that. That's the synthesis of all learning, is to get that structure of how you see the world, and to know, like, I don't know if I can explain this right, Carla, but when you and I start talking and then we come through our different experiences and then we arrive at a place where we find a little difference in perspective and then we work on it and then we get to unity, I'm closer to knowing the answer than I've ever been. because Carla agrees with me, because we see it the same way. And it's such a beautiful thing. And we need more of that in this whole community, less fighting about dogma and stuff, and more of reaching for that synthesis and unity together.
And if I can jump in, a lot of times it's much more effective than in the discussion you're going to have in grad school. So again, it really depends on what's your goal in life. Do you want to pursue the academic background because it's the path that you want to go, or you want to work with a restoration project for your life mission? There is no right or wrong answer. It just depends on where you want to go.
I would add something else to this. This is not a theoretical problem. This is a physical issue. And it's an enormous physical problem that we're facing on a planetary scale. And so you need to be on the front line. You don't need to be in the ivory tower right now. The answers, when we're talking about something, for 12,000 years, we've been doing agriculture. And before that, we were probably driving mastodons into pits to kill the, megafauna. So we've been messing up the predator-prey relationships and the landscapes around the world for a very long time. So this is new. So you're not going to learn this in university because they don't know it. If you go to soil school, they'll tell you it takes 10,000 years to make a little bit of soil or something. They're talking about geologic materials, weathering of geologic materials. They're not talking about living soils. They don't know this. They're paid by the agribusiness industries, and they're on a path that's there to commodify everything. And the fact is, food should be a right. When did food become a commodity? When did food become a product? And so now you have people who don't have any money, they can't eat. That's absolutely ridiculous. So we really need, and I mean, eating is one thing, but we need to realize that these situations with the weather, with the extreme events that are happening, they're multiplying. They're multiplying in period and intensity. This is like serious stuff. And the scale of it is hard to focus on because you don't want to put your mind to it because it's scary. But you have to. And when you do, then there's no other conclusion. You can only come to this conclusion like, we're going to have to work really hard. We're going to have to be very effective. We're going to have all of humanity shift away from the idea that life is about materialism to understand that we have to restore Earth systems or humanity is in serious danger of going extinct. We're in the 6th great extinction that has existed as far as we can tell. And if you study extinction, you find that the top of the food chain is the most at risk. Well, that should give you something to think about. So, really, this is if you're called to do this, there's a reason, and you're not going to be able to easily get away from it. I can tell you that, and it might not be the best thing for your business exactly, but it's going to be there's going to be a lot of work. I can tell you that.
Yeah, John, always spot on. Thank you. So the next question, we're going to change the subject a tiny bit to get a loop from a beautiful discussion happening in the chat. Question from Jesse. I'm interested in hearing more about the panel's thoughts on biochar. There is a lot of interest in it in my area, though I have some reservation about it. Seems like it's really just homes and food for the soil life, sorry, which can be added in easier ways, it seems. Who wants to start?
For myself, I use biochar in the Yucatan, and one of the reasons I started using it is because we have extremely fast draining soil, and so we need to hold the moisture in the soil. And because biochar to me is a sponge, it's holding all the nutrients, it's holding water in the soil, and so when there's a heavy rain, biochar absorbs that rain and then it holds it there like a sponge and then doesn't let all that go down. And then you're charging it with all these nutrients, and then it holds those nutrients in the soil, in the biochar, and it slowly releases them out. And the next time we get a real inundation of rain, the biochar is holding those nutrients instead of washing all the way down into our cenote and our groundwater system. So that's why it's really important to me, because we're growing vegetables in our garden. You know, our neighbor, our Mayan neighbor, produces a vegetable about this big. He gave us seed for it. This is the local Mayan squash. And we got these huge pumpkins, and we showed it to him, and he was like, "What? What's that?" And he's like, "It's the seed you gave us." We grew it in biochar and using organic amendments. And so, you know, and the corn we got, you know, he's giving us these fingers, you know, 6 inches long corn, and we're getting like 12-inch corn. So, and the plants are double the size of his, just from having good practices and holding the soil and holding the moisture and the nutrients in the beds rather than letting it all disappear.
Did you compare flavor-wise as well, Paul?
I'd actually know, I'd never tried his corn or his squash. I just tried ours. But in the Yucatan, it's kind of a game changer. I know when I used biochar in Canada, it was also excellent on sandy soil. But I mean, if the richer the soil is, the less benefit than the biochar is. So, you know, maybe you get like double your production in the Yucatan, and maybe you get, you know, 20-30% increase in your productivity in Canada, per se.
Yeah, well, I really like that you brought that to the table, Paul, with that experience, and especially in tropical ecosystems, it seems like whether they're humid or arid, that biochar has these amazing effects, right? There is reported consistently, maybe a little less consistently in more mesic systems or more you know, northern boreal forests. But I mean, you said Canada as well, and I'm open to it. In fact, I'll post in the chat a link to some of my papers that I did when I was in academia, and I got really excited about biochar. And down that list, there's one published in Helion, which is an open access journal, so I know anybody can read it from anywhere in the world. And I got really excited about how biochar could facilitate mycorrhizal fungi, because, as you said, the nutrients like the phosphorus get drawn inside the biochar pores, and then the mycorrhizal fungi can send in hyphae to harvest that. And so then the plant is like, I really need the mycorrhizae, I'll share more carbon with them, and you get this, we saw a proliferation of mycorrhizal biomass in the soils that we amended with a very small amount of biochar. It did not take a lot. But it's one of those things I always want to, I say all that to say, I'm very positive on it. It's sort of like the supplements marketplace, where there are supplements I believe in and take, and that other friends have said, you should try this or whatever. And I do. And I look for research when I can find it. And a lot of times it's like, oh yeah, some people get help by taking this supplement. But there's so much shenanigans in the supplements marketplace too. And like, I'm not going to call any specific thing out, but they've gone in there and tested them and found them to not be consistent, or even sometimes what they claim you're buying and all. And so it's like this multi-billion-dollar industry that seems like there's a lot of stuff. A biochar could become the same thing. I mean, any product, any agricultural product that's like, hey, magic solution, just pour this on the ground and walk away. Like, that's a problem. And the mentality, it's like the commodification of the process. I'm sure you did it the right way, Paul, and the way I would encourage all of the people in the room today to think about it is like, I need to work with this. I need to trial it. I need to see, like, what does 10 grams look like over here? Now, what does 20 grams look like over here? When I was 30 grams, and do a gradient and find, like, for your system, climate, soils, is there a positive response? Is there a sweet spot? Does it make sense for you to invest in that project on a larger scale? Because people get sold fairy dust in agriculture and in landscape management, and then they apply it on bajillions of hectares of land, and then they go, I'm never going to listen to anybody that talks about soils again. Because this didn't work.
I think there's another thing about biochar you need to be aware of, that there are sometimes toxic substances connected with it. You have to be very, very aware about how this is made and what the base material was that you were making it from and which process was used. So I would be a little, it's not a magic bullet. That's definitely the case. Right. But it does look interesting that you can still find traces of it in the Amazon, in the Terra Preta, that it lasts for a very long time. But I think there's no time for this conversation, but there's a really important discussion around what are we talking about with this carbon business, because a lot of the carbon stuff is sort of not really helpful in understanding what's going on. It's equating, and it's sort of been sold very effectively to suggest that carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases, egregious emissions of this CO2 and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, equals human impact on climate. That's not true. That's a partial truth, and you have to be very, very careful with this. And I would, there is so much complexity to what we're talking about. You cannot believe the number of fields that you have to study to really understand this. It's just ridiculous. If I'd known what I was getting myself into, I don't think I would have started. But once you take the first step, you can't stop, because you realize that is a truth. So now we're talking about things which are fundamental truths. They're not opinions. They're not things which, it's my opinion, so that's what I believe. Nobody cares about that. Nobody cares what I believe. But what is important is that this is true, that the soil, the moisture, the atmosphere, the fertility, life, death, all depend on this. And suddenly you're in another space. It's a very, very profound space when you go there. So if you're interested and you're curious and you never give up, then I recommend this, because you got a lifetime to study this. And the more you study, the more incredibly fascinating you'll find it. The more you'll be able to serve yourself, your children, your community, life in general, the earth forever. And we are determining the quality of life for all life in the future by what we understand and what we do now. That's where we're at. So we need you. We need all of us to understand and participate together in the great work of our time to restore ecological function on a planetary scale. I'm starting to rant. I better stop.
No, it's not ranting. It's just like that shake that we need time to time, John. I know that we're on top of the hour, but panelists, do you have time for one more question? Are we good for that?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a very good one that again, is another that we can spend days and days talking about. Is a question from Francis. How do you determine the best way to produce food and fiber along with ecological preservation?
Well, I find more and more when I'm working with ecosystems and trying to, create food for myself and create food forests and that sort of thing. It's the local plants. It's all these plants that the indigenous people used. It's, what they've grown up in this ecosystem for, thousands of years, and they've learned which species are most appropriate for the area. And we keep getting this crazy idea that our gardens have to be a supermarket and look like the supermarket store. But, here there's like 100 different types of fruits that aren't in the grocery store and that actually thrive on this very poorly drained or well-drained soil and very dry and can, survive the 6 months dry season. And, they're the best adapted to this site. And I bring in, corn from somewhere else and try to grow it here, and it failed. And I grow the corn from my neighbor and it thrives. So for me, that's the testament. Bringing in things from other areas, it just doesn't work. Work with the local species. They're the best suited for that particular environment. And in every part of the planet, there's fiber species, the food species. We didn't exist in these areas without them. So find out what they are.
I would also maybe suggest that you need to consider what are perennials and what are annuals, and understand that annuals are expressing early evolutionary succession and are usually found at the edges of larger climax equilibriums. And the perennials are going to leave their root systems and they're going to have a high canopy. When we understand that the biology is affecting the physics, then we have to understand that the solar radiation, when it's interrupted at the highest level, that's going to be much better than if it's just interrupted a few inches or a few feet above or a few meters above the surface. And the tallest trees are 400 feet tall and 4,000 years old. So we're going to have to wait a while to see these again. But if we don't get it right, they'll never exist again on the earth. And I think that's what the sad thing is, that most people in ecology are walking around acting like, well, we can never have a climax equilibrium in ecology anymore because humans are so stupid. Well, I think we should smarten up and understand that we can have a climax equilibrium sometime in the future. And in fact, we won't even be here if we don't learn how to do this. So that's our future, and it's a beautiful future, and that's what we need to do.
Yeah, all of us here took the right pill, so let's keep spreading the correct one everywhere we go. So just to revamp this amazing webinar, I know that we can spend days here. I can just stop and listen, the three of you, forever. Just to reinforce that next week, our webinar will be on Monday, 11 a.m. Pacific time zone, 7 p.m. London time. So don't forget to adjust accordingly to your time zone. And we're going to talk about your future in soil regeneration and ecological restoration. Discover how you can make an impact on the world around you by training in ecosystem restoration and learning the soil food web approach. In the name of everyone from the school and from the Paul and John amazing crew, we thank you all for being here with us. You can reach us in all the social medias and also contact directly Paul and John on their crew. And once more, thank you. And I leave the word with the panelists for their for their last words for the day. Sorry.
I just want to thank you, Carla, for hosting. And if I was to give a descriptive of you, it'd be unparalleled. You're an unparalleled delight to interact with.
Thank you.
Well, if I were to say anything, I'd say thank you to all the technical staff who make this work. Thanks very much. And also, Paul, it was wonderful to listen to your presentation. Congratulations on your work.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that thank you for sticking with us to the end. It's really appreciated. I mean, you are the people that we want out there doing this work, you know, restoring the health of this planet. We only have one living planet that we know of, so we want to protect it. We want to be good stewards of this land.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend and keep doing the amazing work. See you guys next week.
Don't forget to click that like button, subscribe to our channel, and ring the notification bell to stay updated with all our new videos.